If you've ever found yourself just staring at a blank page, absolutely terrified by the idea of finding a truly original research topic, you are definitely not alone. It's one of the biggest hurdles out there. But what if I told you it's not about luck? What if it's a strategy you can learn? Well, let's dive in. There's this romantic idea that big, groundbreaking ideas just pop into your head. A eureka moment out of nowhere. But honestly, that's almost never how it actually works. The first thing we have to do is get rid of that myth. Finding a gap is a skill. It's not like winning the lottery.
So where do we start? It all begins with a huge mindset shift. Most of us, we're taught to read like students. We're just passively soaking up facts, trying to memorize them for a test. But to find a research gap, you have to start reading like a researcher. And that means you're actively questioning, critiquing, you're interrogating every single thing you read.
And that brings us to the core philosophy of this whole thing. Finding a research gap isn't about reading more. It's about changing how you read. It's about reading with a very specific and very critical purpose.
This right here, this is the question you need to have running on a loop in the back of your mind. For every single paper, for every paragraph. You're not just looking at what's there on the page, you are actively hunting for what's missing. What did the authors choose to leave out? Because that's where the real opportunities are hiding.
So let's get practical. I want you to start thinking of every research paper as a kind of hidden map. And on this map, the authors have actually left you clues. Clues that point directly to the gaps they were trying to fill. And, by extension, the gaps that still exist for you to find.
Your first stop is always the introduction. This is where the author has to justify why their study even exists. They have to convince everyone, especially the reviewers, that their work matters. And to do that, they have to spell out the problem, the question, the thing that previous research just couldn't answer.
And while you're there, keep your eyes peeled for signal phrases. Seriously, these things are absolute gold. When you see words like, however, or a phrase like, while previous studies have focused on X, your brain should light up. The author is basically waving a giant red flag, showing you exactly where the old research fell short.
So don't just skim the intro thinking it's boring background stuff. It's not. It's a confession. The author is handing you on a silver platter the exact limitation they're about to solve. Your job is to just collect these confessions from a bunch of different papers.
Okay, next up, the literature review. Now, the big mistake people make here is getting bogged down, trying to read every single paper that's cited. That's student mode reading. As a researcher, you're going to scan for the shape of the field. What are the dominant ideas, the most popular methods? What is everyone talking about?
I mean, think about it. If you realize that 90% of the papers in a field are all using the exact same method or studying the exact same group, well, where do you think the real opportunity is? It's probably in that other 10% that everyone else is completely ignoring.
And that's really the secret, isn't it? The lit review shows you the gaps not just by what it includes, but by what it leaves out. The patterns of what's popular and what's being ignored, those are your clearest signposts pointing you toward a fresh, original research gap.
All right, now we come to my personal favorite part of any paper, the discussion section. I like to call this the honest section. Because, for the sake of scientific integrity, this is where authors have to admit what their study couldn't do. They have to talk about its flaws, its limitations.
And just like in the intro, you are hunting for very specific phrases. When an author writes something like, future research should really investigate, they are literally giving you a direct order. They are writing out a to-do list of potential research projects just for you. So you see, you don't have to guess what to do. These experienced researchers are telling you exactly where the entire field needs to go next. Your job is just to listen and take notes.
Okay, so finding a gap is one thing. That's great. But is it a gap that's actually worth your time and effort? Not every missing piece of the puzzle is important. So we need to run it through a little litmus test.
It's a pretty simple two-step process. First, pull together 5 or 10 related papers and lay them out side by side. The really juicy gaps often live in the empty space between studies, the question that none of them are even thinking to ask. And second, you have to stress test your idea. Ask yourself, if I filled this gap, so what? Would it actually change how we understand anything important? If the answer is no, then it's probably not a gap worth pursuing.
Now, once you've found a gap and you know it's significant, you have to be able to state it clearly. And for that, I've got this super simple but incredibly powerful formula for you. Studies explain X, but they consistently overlook Y. Using this forces you to be precise, and it immediately shows everyone why your research matters.
All right, theory is one thing, but let's see how this whole framework actually works in the wild. We're going to take a real research abstract and apply this method to hunt for the gap in real time.
Okay, so take a look at this title. I know, it's a mouthful. It sounds super dense, incredibly complex, right? But with our method, we don't need to be an expert in this specific topic. We just need to know how to look for the clues.
And there it is. Boom, right there in the abstract. First, they set the context for us. Then, look at that beautiful signal word, however. The author is telling us, hey, here's the problem. The problem is that current systems are only focused on foot-mounted devices, which is really restrictive. And that, right there, is our gap.
So let's plug what we found into our magic formula. Studies explain indoor localization using UWB/IMU fusion, but they overlook generic solutions by focusing only on restrictive foot-mounted systems. See how perfectly that works? In just a few seconds, we decoded a really complex paper and nailed its core contribution.
All right, let's do a quick-fire recap of the key takeaways here. First, change your mindset. Read like a researcher, not a student. Second, use a paper's structure as your treasure map. Third, hunt for those game-changing signal phrases. And finally, use that X but overlook Y formula to state your finding with confidence.
You know, this whole process isn't just about finding a topic to graduate. It's about finding a genuinely important question that needs an answer, a question that will actually push your field forward. So the only question I have left for you is this: what overlooked question are you going to be the one to answer?